I have a special treat for all of you who braved the weather today. Well, it feels good, doesn't it? Yeah? Can you feel it? Feel the sun? You can hear the waves? I know some of you have just gotten back from a place like this. But it feels good just to think about that, doesn't it? What that must be like. So anyway, that's your present for Happy Epiphany. Doesn't want to go away. Funny how our mind can do things for us, isn't it? We see a picture, we feel a certain way, have a certain experience. And that's the way the season of Epiphany is like. We see the wise men, and we become interested in spiritual things. We kind of wonder about what it was that they were actually about, and why it was that they were so interested in the birth of Jesus. Every generation has their image of wise men. Can anybody tell me who's up on the screen right now? There you go. Boy, you guys are good. We have our own stories about wise men. Every culture has this idea that there are some people who set about learning truth, who go on a journey, who follow a discipline, so that they might live better lives, and so that they might encourage people along life's way. And the Magi were there to encourage the Holy Family along life's way. It amazes me how much these wisdom figures can take over our popular imagination. You know, you may have noticed the call to worship today was from Lord of the Rings. You notice that? Not all those who wander are lost. And when I Googled that, trying to get a picture of it, I came up with so many people who were showing off their tattoos. There were so many people who had that quote tattooed on their body. It was really surprising. So there are people in our society who may not look like us. They may have never been in a church before. They may not have opened the Bible. They may not have thought about a spiritual discipline. But yet they have this yearning. And they have this sense that there is a better way to live life on this earth. Every generation has its wise men. Some of the oldest Christian artwork dwelled on the theme of being a wise man and seeking wisdom. This is one of the oldest paintings in the catacombs, and as you can see, from an early time they had 3 wise men coming to bring their gifts to Jesus. It was a model of what it means to be a part of the Christian faith and giving our gifts to God. Some of you may also, those of you who are fans of Facebook, you may remember the Mayan calendar. Remember that back in 2012? According to the Mayan calendar, the world is ending this month. But fortunately, the Oreo cookie says not to worry. Now, when we talk about Magi, we're not talking about fortune telling. We're talking about truth telling. We're not talking about predicting the future. We're talking about lifting up the things that really matter in life. Today we have the story of John the Baptist, who was a definitive, radical departure from business as usual. He talked about baptism. And those of us that are baptized, we hang on to our baptism because we belong to a different group of people. It's a sign that we've begun a spiritual journey. One of the church growth workshops we went to this last year, they said the one thing you ought to measure is the number of adult baptisms that you have in your church. Because it shows that you're reaching out to the community, to people who never had a spiritual home. And they said that what you ought to do sometime in worship is what I'm going to do right now. I'm I'm going to say, if there is someone here today who has never been baptized, and you wonder about it, and you've kind of thought about it, come see me or talk to me, and I'll talk to you about baptism, about how it's a beginning of a journey, how it's belonging to a group of people who have the same yearnings and the same desire for the world to be different. And that's what John the Baptist was about. That's what the wise men were about. They were setting a course that was completely different from the way the world operates. Completely different from King Herod. Completely different from the peoples that they lived among. And they were prophets because they were telling the truth about what was in their heart. Some of you may know who Douglas Adams is. Do you know what book Douglas Adams wrote? Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Has anybody read that book? And anyway, he has this interesting quote at the beginning of it. In the beginning, the universe was created. This has made a lot of people very angry and been widely regarded as a bad move. This is original sin, right? He gets it from that idea. That there are many bad things in the world. Now, it'll be Monday when these radiant stars come down. This is a Sunday of Epiphany. It's a day we remember a spiritual quest. And we reflect on John the Baptist, who was a wild man in the wilderness. He completely departed from the way people live. It's a day for us to remember the wise men and the quest that they took. And one thing we know about being human is that we have drive. We need achievement. We're naturally goal-oriented. And we feel most alive when we're engaged in some kind of a quest. Jesus said, ask, knock, seek, and you will find. Enter by the narrow gate. He talked about parables, about finding something that was lost. And many of the sayings of Jesus have to do with beginning a journey to know God. And you do that with other people who share the same quest, like John the Baptist. Baptism is the beginning of the journey. Today we remember that trips can be miserable. Many of you have been on a miserable trip. The wise men went over 500 miles on camels in the desert. That's quite some quest. It would seem like it would be easy to get lost. It would seem like there would be a lot of people who thought they ought to turn back and quit. It would seem like there would be an awful lot of complaining along the way. I'm not sure if there are mosquitoes in the desert or not, but there certainly are bugs. There are breakdowns. There are camels that get sick. There are canceled flights. But all of us have those detours. And all of us have those specific obstacles in our life. And the important thing is not to allow it to stop us. And so, in this world, John the Baptist and Jesus and these people from far away, they all contributed to the existence of something called the church. A place where they could create a caring community. It's a place where we learn to do things differently. And baptism is the start of that journey. And I honestly didn't know that there was so much illness and confusion and unfulfilled longing in people's lives until I started out in ministry. And so maybe I see it a little more than the average person, but I often think, poor, frail humanity. How is it that we live in this big ocean? And how is it that we keep going when sometimes the quest looks like it won't be fulfilled? This idea of the Magi comes through in literature. William Gates, The Magi, some of you may have read that. T.S. Eliot has The Journey of the Magi. Some of you might might remember O. Henry. Anybody here remember O. Henry? O. Henry. He had that great story, The Gift of the Magi. Henry Van Dyke wrote a very interesting story called The Fourth Wise Man, about someone who missed the caravan and ended up wandering his whole life trying to find Jesus. Now the Magi, I've seen at Christmas plays, have always had their hats falling off. And we saw that a little bit in our children's moment today. They're always a little uncertain. They always don't quite know where they're going. But throughout history, it's been a popular theme. This comes from the Middle Ages. It was made for a family called the Gonzaga family. And this hangs in the Getty Museum. And it's famously called the Adoration of the Magi. Now in the Middle Ages, it was a popular thing for people to do, patrons to do, would be to commission an artist to draw them in a biblical story. In other words, they would take you, they would draw your face, and then they would say, okay, what great biblical story do you want to be a part of? And very often you'll find these paintings from the Middle Ages of the Magi, and those family members will be painted into the picture because they want to be on a quest. You might say, what were those wise men really like? Well, I can tell you that they were like you. They wanted to know what life is about. They wanted a solution to the number one question that everybody wants to know. Why is there evil and suffering in the world? They were courageous enough to leave their families and their homes and their familiar lands and their languages. They left their children, whatever age they might have been in, small or large, because they wanted to know the truth. Now, the only person in the whole Bible who questions that there is such a thing as truth was a cynical Roman leader who said in a scoffing way to Jesus at a trial, what is truth? We all know in our hearts that there's a journey to God, a journey that we need to take, and a journey that we need to be on and to stay on for 500 miles. And more than anything else, they wanted to know what God was up to. And they yearned for God. And they wanted to be able to see through this veil of life and its illusions, and they were willing to sacrifice for it. Now we got to think about what the ancient world must have been like, but think about today's world, about making a journey like that. Now there is no way that those camel bags of gold, frankincense, and myrrh would have made it through customs. How would you explain that to the TSA? They didn't have papers. You can't cross the border unless you have a passport. Think about how dangerous that journey was. Think about the world that they lived in. I grew up wondering about the stars. My father had an astronomical club, and there was an observatory right next to our house. So nearly every night we'd go outside and look at the stars. Now you can look at stars scientifically, but you also have to look at stars as a way that they act upon us in spiritual ways. They cause us to consider the vast expanse of space and how much stuff is out there and how small we are. And it gives us a sense of proportion and humility and awe at the greatness of God. And these ancient people, they relied on stars to navigate and to tell them when the season was right to plant their crops and when it was right to harvest. And they believed that the stars and the moon had power over people. That's why we have words like lunatic and lunacy. It comes from the word lunar. There's a popular psalm that says, the sun will not harm you by day, nor the moon by night. They believed that the world was a frightening place, a lonely place, a scary place. They saw everywhere they went desperate poverty and wars and rumors of wars. Yet they found humble and quiet people who lived decent lives and they could see the possibilities of a new world and a reign of justice. And we can't talk about Christmas stories and the meaning of Epiphany if we forget about the real-life motivations of the people who live them. It's hard for us to talk about the difficult parts of the Christmas story. Herod's slaughter of the innocents, the wise men coming from a long distance because they were looking for a better world. But we can't forget about these motivations, because there are motivations. And the Bible portrays the Magi as adventurers, not so much as the Marco Polars of a few centuries ago, but spiritual adventurers. They had a sense of calling that gave them a sense of significance. And what we learn from them is to ask ourselves, do you have a call from God? Do you have gifts to share? Do you have people who can make a difference in this world that you encourage? It's time for people to shine. Whether or not you're thinking about baptism today, whether or not you've been baptized today, whether or not you've had any kind of a spiritual journey at all in your life, there's something within you that yearns for that. So begin the journey today to look behind the shadows of this world, to let hope be born in you, to find wisdom. A few weeks ago, I was in D.C. and I saw the King Monument for the first time. Pretty impressive. I encourage you, in D.C., you should go see it. There's a wall behind what you can see here, and it has many quotes of the King on it. You might remember that when the King statue first went up, there was some controversy about the words that are on this piece of the statue. I was a drum major for justice, peace, and righteousness. Because it's taken somewhat out of context. The King didn't say that about himself. He said, if you want to say, I am. Today, we live in the spirit of the Magi. We live in the spirit of a time when we're trying to do things that make a difference in the world and to lift up the people who are about that work, just like they did. And so, Martin Luther King said this: if you want to say I was a drum major, say that I was a drum major for justice. Say that I was a drum major for peace. Say that I was a drum major for righteousness. And all of the other shallow things will not matter. I won't have any money to leave behind. I won't have fine and luxurious things of life to leave behind. But I just want to leave a committed life behind. And that's all I want to say. Yes, Jesus, I want to be on your right or on your left side, not for selfish reasons. I want to be on your right or your left side, not in terms of some political kingdom or ambition, but I just want to be there in love and in justice and in truth and in commitment to others, so that we can make of this old world a new world. So today,